Good morning, everyone. This is Isaac Steincamp from the Chess Summit Network, and I've come out with another video. I kind of came off with a late start this morning. I honestly didn't know what I wanted to make the video on, so I decided I'd sleep on it so I could do some better analysis and try to come up with something a little bit better. And for today's video, I wanted to share one of my games from the G75 Pennsylvania State Chess Championships from last week, where I was playing a lower-rated player, but the opening didn't go as planned, and it resulted in a completely equal position. And it was all about piece play, and I thought that was a really instructive moment because it shows that even in completely drawn positions, players who play too passively will go about losing games. But before I started showing my game, there was one perk of waiting till this morning to shoot this video, which was the Schach Bundesliga in Germany has been going on this morning, and Pavel Ulyanov had a nice little trick against Ariane Tari from Norway that I wanted to share with you guys. So this is the position. Ulyanov is white, and as you can see, he's got a much better position. He has a passed c-pawn, and in this position, he found the cute little trick here, which was c takes d6, offering the queen, and then pushing the pawn just one more. It was critical to not take the pawn on e7 because king to f7 would simply win the pawn, or even g5 could stop the pawn from promoting, whereas this move d7 stops rook to d4 from happening. And here Ariane Tari resigned, and giving Pavel Ulyanov the win because this pawn will queen, and white is simply up a full piece. So a nice win there by Pavel Ulyanov, cool tactic. So let's go back to my game. Let's go ahead and skip to the critical moment. So this was the resulting position of the opening. I tried an opening novelty that didn't exactly work as planned, and as you can see, white is still not castled, but the pawn structure is symmetrical, which means that there's usually not that much in terms of dynamic opportunities for either side. Now in this position, I wanted to start here because my opponent missed an opportunity that would have equalized immediately, thus showing how these positions can be very drawish. So I retreated to e2, and my opponent played bishop to b7, but if he had found the move a5, which I'd seen during the tournament, I honestly don't know if I could have gone about winning this game. Because bishop takes b5, takes b4, takes c6, takes c3, takes c3, rook takes c3, and with 4 pawns on the same side of the board, it's very likely that this position will be equal. But I do have to be careful because it's not so clear how I'm going to go about making the most of this position. For example, if I put bishop to b2, already black can start planning for bishop to b4 after a move like rook to a2 or rook to b3. So there was still a lot to prove in this position, I think, for white to get equality, but I'm pretty sure it fizzles out. So my opponent missed this opportunity, and because of that, we get this sort of static structure for the rest of the game. So bishop to b7, castles. Now if he plays a5, it probably still equalizes. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about it. But at least my king's out of the way, so it makes the position a little bit less venomous. But my opponent decided to play queen to c7, which completely means that a5 is no longer possible, because after a5, there's knight takes b5, attacking his queen. And so here I had a long think, because I was very disappointed with my opening position. I wasn't sure if I could pull out a win. My opponent, he's been 1900 before, so I figured he was a pretty strong player. And, I wasn't so sure how to go about making progress. So the first step for me was, I kind of realized that for me to make the most of this position, I probably don't want to trade. And that's not because I have a space advantage or a static advantage. It's just because the more pieces I have, the more potential I'm going to have. It's that simple. So I saw that my opponent was probably planning for a rook trade on the d file, and I wanted to be able to blockade that but with the move like bishop to d3, but I also wanted to have some strength behind that move. So I did a little bit of thinking, and I came up with this move, queen to b1. It's a little bit subtle, but the idea is that when I play bishop to d3 to block the d file, I do have a target on h6, and I can get ready to play rook on f to d1, and by opening up the e2 square for the after my bishop moved, it opens it up for my knight, which would open up my b2 bishop. So I have pieces pointing over to my opponent's king side. So I have some general idea of where I want my pieces to be. It's not so clear what black wants to do, because black is somewhat behind. I have a rook on d2. He doesn't. My queen's on a better square than his. But again, my simplistic plan isn't enough to kind of get an advantage yet. So let's see what happens. Rook on a to d8, offering the rook trade. Well, we talked about this. I'm playing bishop g3. My opponent immediately played h6, taking away any tactics on h7. So in this position, I thought it was critical to take away any equalizing resources for my opponent or resources that offer my opponent counterplay. And I thought in this kind of position, my opponent does have the option of playing a move like knight to e5. And, if I'm not careful and there's no knight takes b5 tactics, the trades might not help, and especially if he can get to take on f3. So rather than kind of letting this up in the air, my opponent doesn't really have that much else. So I decided to take this away with this move knight to e2. So now the bishop covers both the e5 and d4 squares. The c file is just opened up, so my f1 rook is headed to c1. My opponent played rook to d7, which was like the first mistake because it's really slow. If he plays rook to d8, I mean, okay, like he's being somewhat active, but the way that he played this position after after having thought about this move for so long, I want to say that this move was kind of a mistake because this rook actually becomes a little bit vulnerable to some tactics. So I played rook to c1. He played queen d8, which was a mistake. His queen needed to either go to b6 or b8. But okay, he played queen d8. I played rook cd1. The idea being bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, bishop h7 check, followed by taking the rook on d7 for free. King to h8. And I actually missed a simple idea here, which was just bishop takes b5, a simple pawn grab. Missing the fact that if my opponent were to take my rook on d2, I'm attacking his queen, so the intermezzo doesn't help. And should he take my bishop, he again runs into problems. I wasn't really looking at this. I really liked my light squared bishop, and I was trying to make something work on the king side, so this kind of escaped my attention. But I still think the move that I played gave me a lot of decent potential, which was this move knight to f4. Because I'm continuing to improve my position. Knight on e2 was my worst placed piece, and now I do have some options. My opponent's knight on f6 might be stuck now. You could consider it that way because my knight could go to h5 if my opponent isn't careful. But this knight also takes away some of the d5 square options for my opponent too. So my opponent played queen to b8, and at this point I kind of realized I did a little bit of like a 4 or 5 minute think here. This move actually was a sign from my opponent that he has no idea what to do. He's actually copying what I did early in the game by playing queen to b1, but unfortunately the phase of the game which it made sense for my queen to be on b1 is over. And so copying me in this position actually was just a waste of time. And as you'll see later in the game, if his queen was on a8, this would have been a completely different position. So I played this move queen to a1. The idea being now that the knight is completely pinned, and I'm attacking the g7 pawn if he does move it. Excuse me. So he does have some stuff to worry about, but still nothing concrete yet. But here, all my pieces have been perfectly placed. I'm putting a little bit of pressure on black. My opponent has been playing very passively for the last couple moves, and it's really easy to crumble in these kinds of positions. So here I played this move. Here my opponent played this move rook to g8, which was not a very strong move. It also boxes in the king, and my tactical intuition kind of turned on here because I kind of realized that the g6 square would be a great place to put a knight if there's no pawn on f7. So I kind of came up with this kind of funny-looking move, knight to h4. The idea is obviously that if my opponent were to play a nothing move, knight to g6 is coming, and my opponent will have to give up some material because knight to g6, f takes g6, knight takes g6, king to h7, knight takes e7 check, king to h8, knight takes g8, and the game is just simply over. So in this kind of position, it's really easy to panic, and unfortunately there's no g5 because the f6 knight is hanging, and I believe we can just go ahead and shake hands because there really aren't that many options left for my opponent. He's struggling very much to get air in this kind of position, so really not that much left to prove. If he plays a move like rook to g7, I can save my piece by playing knight to h5. So nothing really there for my opponent. G6 fails for the same exact reasons. So the most natural move I thought, and the move I was expecting was rook to e8. Well, the honest truth was I played knight to h4 with threatening knight to g6, trying to create some weaknesses. And my thought was, okay, if he gets the rook away from g8, he's wasted a tempo. But now his knight on f6 is pinned, and I can go back to f3, and he has to think now if he wants to actually go back to g8. The other thought is that, psychologically, my opponent had to do all this calculation. He just played rook to e8, but, well, if he does play rook to e8, he has to calculate to make sure knight to g6 doesn't work, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't. But he had to calculate that. I went in knowing that I wouldn't even consider this move unless he made it, possible. I would only consider it if he played the move rook e8. Now I would look at knight to g6, but I was realistically already looking at a move like a knight back to f3. And, you might ask, like, okay, well, isn't that just a waste of a move? Well, my opponent his rook is no longer protecting the g7 pawn, and this is kind of a psychological play, this repetition, kind of like asking him what he wants to do. A lot of grandmasters do, they repeat 2 moves in some positions if they have a slight advantage, for psychological reasons. So, if we go back, my opponent actually completely panicked here, and this definitely changed the course of the game with this move, rook takes d3. And now with rook takes d3, my opponent is offering me the exchange, and I have to take it. It was important to play rook takes d3, by the way, because if knight takes d3, my opponent does get some play with knight to e2, and now the knight on h4 is his, so I didn't opt for this. I played rook takes d3. And here I thought that the move my opponent played, knight to d5, was a little bit of a cop-out. I thought he had to try to find a move like e5. I mean, it's not optimal, but it does block in the diagonal, and I do have to consider my options. Already a move like knight to e2. My opponent has this option e4 if he wants to, or he can just move this knight away from f6 to somewhere like e4. My knight on h4 is under attack. If he goes here, and I try, just be simplistic in my retreat, e4 is, a major problem. So I thought that this was an interesting line. I think instead of knight there, probably knight to f5 does the trick because I'm attacking the bishop. I can also go back to g3. White is still better in this position, but I thought black had more chances of trying to complicate things. Unfortunately, my opponent's lack of coordination will allow for a move like rook to d7, and his entire 7th rank is really weak. So this was an interesting observation, but okay, my opponent played knight to d5, offering me this trade. Thank you very much. I retreated, and now we have a simplistic position. My opponent played knight to e7, and here I'm going to recommend that you pause the video and try to find my next move, but you also calculate all of the following lines, because it's really easy to mess up, I think. If you find the move, you'll quickly find that black actually gets a lot of counterplay, and it's not so simple as to how to go about playing the best play. So go ahead and think about that for a little bit. Okay, well, if you haven't paused the video yet, I definitely recommend it. During the game, I think I had about 27 minutes left when I got to this move, and when I made this move, I had about 7 minutes left. So I felt like this was a very important moment in the game, because I do offer my opponent a lot of counterplay, which is something I really don't like to do. But, I'm looking at the position, and I need more opportunities to try to break through. Unfortunately, even though I'm up the exchange, my opponent's bishop pair is actually relatively strong. My lack of control of light squares is somewhat annoying. G2 can become a target, and my opponent can quickly start, pushing pieces down the board if I'm not careful. So the move I played was bishop takes g7. The idea being that if, my opponent takes, there's rook to d8, and this is simply game over. The rook on g8 is pinned, so he can't even, there's absolutely nothing he can do. So he had to play king to h7. And so the reason why I asked you guys to pause the video, bishop takes g7 should have been a relatively easy find. It's the matter of finding the next move. And the reason why I spent so long was originally I really wanted to play knight to f5, h5 rather. Why did I want to play this move so badly? Well, okay, I was looking at a line like queen to h8, knight to f6, and if, he plays bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, bishop takes g2. Things are a little bit complicated, sure, but my opponent's lack of king safety has to be a little bit of concern here. So I thought that this was somewhat interesting for me, but my opponent doesn't have to play like this. And in fact, after king to g6, oddly enough, it's hard to find more ways to get counterplay, and bishop takes f6 is coming, in some lines rook takes g7 is coming. I'm sure white is better, but the evaluation isn't so pretty, and that's why I'm really glad I spent a lot of extra time looking at this move, because I actually found an even better response, and the computer agrees with me, the best move. And so the way I found this move was just by simple, use of principles, looking for forcing moves. Knight to h5 isn't exactly a forcing move, it's kind of like a weird subtlety. So the move that I found was this move, bishop to f6. Now, the reason why I liked this move is because it immediately asks the questions to black, what are you going to do about your minor pieces? Obviously, if my opponent were to trade, he runs into the problem that g2 is still protected. The coordination between the bishop and rook is not that great. And if he tries to spin a move with queen to a8, obviously you guys see that there's also queen takes f7, but there's also queen takes e7. I might just play queen takes f7 in some of these positions just to try to get tactical play, but I would want to analyze this. But, I'm also in no rush. I can also play, a simple move to just get rid of the knight on g2. So, rook to d7 maybe even is a good idea. So I thought that this offered a lot of counterplay. My opponent loses too much time. And my opponent sensed this too. And I was looking at a move like queen to a8. I thought that this was a pretty good try. Because obviously if I play a move like f3, I have to look at moves like bishop takes f3. And this could get somewhat sour very quickly if I'm not careful. Knight to f5 is coming. So the move that I had prepared was just taking the bishop on h4. If he takes on g2 trying to checkmate me, unfortunately for him, I have this move bishop to g3, and now the bishop on g2 is hanging. He must move the bishop, and there's no mate threat on g2 because of the knight on f4, so there's no bishop h3, there's no bishop h1. Bishop f1 is losing, so he has to retreat the bishop, which will give me more than enough time to kind of restart my attack and playing queen to f6 next move, almost no matter what. So I was very pleased with this position. I guess my opponent saw this too, but unfortunately his move was not exactly the most tactically sound, which was rook takes g2. The idea being that after knight takes g2, queen to g8, he's threatening checkmate. I think bishop to g7 already might work, but I obviously didn't want to give him unnecessary material. I found a much nicer resource, f3. And, I'm giving him a pawn, but okay, I bring up the rook. He plays knight to f5. Well, my opponent's attacking. I'm up a lot of material now. In fact, I'm up 2 rooks to a knight. So I decided to just go ahead and, trade off a pair of bishops. My opponent, is threatening my knight on g2, so I played the protective queen to f1. But a colleague of mine made the observation here that rook to d8 is actually completely winning. The threat of going to h8 with the rook is just too much to deal with, and there's really nothing that my opponent can do. He's just too slow. But okay, I played the more protective way, and I didn't have as much time, so I just wanted to play safe. Queen to f1 is perfectly fine. My opponent tried a cute little trick: bishop to e4, rook d7, knight to f3 check, thinking that he would pick up a rook, but unfortunately he walked into checkmate. Even here, if he doesn't take the rook, I honestly don't know what he could do, because he just doesn't have enough resources to keep the position going. And as soon as he ever moves that knight, f7 is a pretty big target. Excuse me. But I thought that this was a relatively interesting game because now, we took a position that there was almost no life in for white. Now white, even in this position where black had decided to not play a5, there's almost no life in this position, and it's really hard to come up with anything. But I thought that this was really telling. You have to be assertive in positions like these. If you want to play for a win, you have to act like you're winning. And, that's why, I played the way I did. It was a matter of realizing that, okay, trading pieces might not actually help me. Recoordinating my pieces, stopping my opponent's counterplay. None of my opponent's pieces can now move beyond the 3rd rank while my pieces are trying to get to the 4th. Just a quick maneuvering game. I had a cool tactic here that I could have tried. But okay, knight to f4, and then it was just a matter of relocating my pieces again. And then psychologically, my opponent, I guess, just folded here. So I thought that this was an interesting game because, it's not very often you see, strong players like this kind of, fall apart in positions where, the assessment is completely equal. And, there is a build-up to it. I mean, this is how you have to win games if you're playing people who are lower rated than you. And definitely something that I've been working on in my own game. So I hope you guys like this video. I'm still deciding what I want to do for my Tuesday and Friday posts. I might actually come out with a video on Tuesday with the idea of connecting it to a post on Friday. But of course, I'm still not sure. Next week on Saturday, I'll be playing in the Metropolitan Chess Championships. It's just a 3-round tournament. It's G90. I just need the games, and hopefully I'll at least have one cool game where both sides played well enough that I think it's an instructive value to share with you guys. So keep an eye out for those. I'm relatively excited with the direction where my chess has gone. February I gained a handful of points, but I feel like the experience I gained this month was much more important. Okay, this is Isaac Steincamp signing off from the Chess Summit Network, and I hope you check back in on Tuesday.